Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing our knock sensor. Something that I want to mention with this is you're going to be having to remove your air intake system. So of course you're going to want to make sure that you have a good gasket or a new gasket for the intake as well. With that said, let's get started by removing our negative battery terminal. Use your 10mm, go ahead and loosen up this nut just enough so you can remove the terminal end here. We'll set this aside so it's making no contact with the negative battery terminal on the battery. Now the knock sensor is going to be located on the back side of the engine behind the intake right here, so we're just going to start getting everything out of the way. Let's start with the engine cover. You can use a 10mm. Generally these are going to come off as nuts. Sometimes you might remove the whole stud. It's okay. No, see? Whole stud. That's okay. Go ahead and get this up and out of the way, set it aside. Now to start removing this right here, let's come right down this area. I'm going to pull this out of its housing area there. Just squeeze on this clamp right here, slide it up. We can remove the hose from down here on the throttle body. You always want to inspect all of your hoses. This one's cracked, it should be replaced. Now let's make our way up along the back side of this. We're going to squeeze on this clamp right here and remove this hose. Take a look at your hose. Just do that on every hose. We'll set that aside, someplace where we can find it in the future. Let's grab this clamp off of the valve cover here. Slide that. Pull the hose off of here. Okay, set that aside. Let's use our 8mm. We're going to loosen up this clamp. Give that a nice wiggle. Remove it from the throttle body. Now let's start removing the rest of this cover. You've got some clamps. Go ahead and pop those. Grab onto this. Separate it. Slide this out of the way. Now at this point, I always like to remove the air filter. We don't want any dirt getting up along the top area there. Set that aside. Okay, now we're going to follow this hose down to the intake. You can find a little squeezable clamp. It's kind of hard to get your fingers in there and squeeze it. Use some pliers or whatever you need to do. Just going to get it right up on there. Slide that off of there, inspect it, set it aside. Now let's move to this connector right here. There's a little squeeze tab in the center. Go ahead and press on that and then remove this. Inspect it, set it aside. All right, now we're just gonna go ahead and grab onto these right here. We're just gonna slide these right off of the stud right there. Give us a little bit of slack. There we are, and now we can remove these two mounting nuts. Now the next thing we're going to do is start removing the fuel rail from this area right here. Just keep in mind that there could potentially be some fuel in the system or even some pressure. So make sure you're wearing hand and eye protection at all times and make sure everything's nice and cool to the touch. Let's use a 10mm. Let's use a 12mm socket on these. Looks like it comes out as a stud. Go ahead and remove the pair of these. They're both the same. We're going to set these aside so we can find them. Now let's just go ahead and grab onto that fuel rail. We'll gently remove it from the engine here. Okay. We'll set this aside. Now we're just going to get these black pieces right out of the way. Just go ahead and pull them right out of there. You can tell where they're supposed to go, essentially right where those mounting studs were. You got two of them, set them aside with those mounting studs themselves. Now let's take a nice clean rag. We're just going to go ahead and put it right into this throttle body here, being very careful not to press on the pressure plate inside there. And then we're going to continue on with some air, and we're going to try to blow off any debris that's in this area. Now let's disconnect the throttle body. There's a little tab right in the center. Go ahead and squeeze on that, and then we'll lift this up. Inspect it, set it aside. Remove this bolt right here using a 12mm socket. Okay, that makes it so we have plenty of slack right here. Now let's go ahead and get underneath the vehicle. From underneath the vehicle, the two bolts that we're going to want to pay attention to is this one right here, using a 12mm. And then there's another one over on the other side, right down here. Just going to use my 12. With a swivel, big old extension or two. Get it right in there. that first bolt. Now from back up inside the engine compartment, let's continue on by removing our mounting hardware from up here. You're gonna find 3 bolts and 2 nuts. There's 1 bolt on the driver's side, then a nut, a bolt in the center, another nut, and then all the way over on the passenger side, there's another bolt. Let's go ahead and start removing those using our 12 millimeter. Just get my socket in here. There's 1 bolt. Let's go ahead and set that aside. I'm just gonna make my way all the way over now. Grab that center bolt. Now before I go ahead and remove this nut right here, I'm just going to go ahead and go over to this end right here because this is the hardest bolt to get to, and then I'll just remove that nut. To get better access to this, I'm just going to go ahead and grab onto this hose, slide it out of its mounting position. With the hose out of the way, we can continue on. There's that bolt. Let's do our last mounting nut here. It's a little shake. Now we're just going to carefully grab this and we're going to slide it away from the engine. You can rest it right down like that. Now we can look down along the back side of the engine here. We have a nice clear view of our knock sensor. Now there's wiring that leads to it. We're of course going to take that off. Once we get the knock sensor off, it'll just be a little bit easier to be able to access. So let's remove that 12 millimeter headed nut and then remove the knock sensor. Find that nut. There's the nut. Grab onto the knock sensor. Go ahead and pull it right off of the engine. There it is. So now you can see the little squeeze tab right here. Go ahead and press on that and separate the two. There it is, friends. Okay, so now we can go ahead and get ready to install our brand new knock sensor. Before we do that, let's go ahead and feel down here where that stud is. Just make sure there isn't any dirt or debris in this area. It feels nice and clean on my particular application. So I'm just going to take that knock sensor and we're going to put it so it's facing towards the driver's side. You don't want it facing up towards the passenger side or even down. Just put it straight across towards the driver's side. We'll go ahead and snug up this bolt and then we're going to torque it to 15 foot-pounds. Okay, torque it. Connect in your connector for this. Listen for a click, give it a nice tug, make sure it's secure. Now I'm just going to put some parts cleaner on a nice rag, and then we're going to wipe down the engine in the areas that the intake gasket's going to ride. You just want to get it nice and free and clear of any debris or oil or anything the like. Once you have the engine clean, we're going to continue on to removing the gasket from the intake itself. Use a small pocket screwdriver or a pick, whatever you have. I'm just going to try to get right in here. Wow, this gasket's hard as a rock. We just got to get in between this so we can pull it out. Sometimes they're really stuck in there. I'm just going to go ahead and start pulling it out. Oh. There's our old gasket. Let's get rid of this. And now we're going to take a rag and just try to clean this up as much as possible as well. All right. If you find after you wipe it down, still seems like there's debris in there, just take your pick, like I said before, or a small screwdriver, and try to get in between where that gasket's going to ride. We want this to be as flat as possible. Now we can start inserting our brand new gasket. Generally, I try to start in the middle on these. Just going to go right like that. Bring that center across. Once you have the centers in, you can usually do the outer portion much easier. right in there. You want to double and even triple check this gasket. Just ensure that it's definitely completely inside there. If it seems like it's out a little bit, it could potentially fold over and you're going to have a vacuum leak and you're definitely going to have a running condition. Once you're sure that you have your gasket on there completely, let's go ahead and grab onto that intake. We're just going to gently lift it up and try to put it so these ears go up and over their corresponding studs. Go ahead and slide that right in. There we are. Now we can grab our 2 mounting nuts, put those onto the corresponding studs here. Now I'm not so worried about the intake falling off while I'm working. This looks good. I'll just tighten this a little bit. Okay. Let's start in our other 3 bolts up top here. Once you're sure that you have your gasket on there completely, let's go ahead and grab onto that intake. We're just going to gently lift it up and try to put it so these ears go up and over their corresponding studs. Go ahead and slide that right in. There we are. Now we can grab our 2 mounting nuts, put those onto the corresponding studs here. Now I'm not so worried about the intake falling off while I'm working. This looks good. I'll just tighten this a little bit. Okay. Now let's start putting in our bolts. Okay, to each of the sides. Make sure we start all of these in by hand. You definitely want to make sure they're not cross-threaded. Sometimes you just have to wiggle the intake around a little bit. Now we can start snugging these up. We're just going to bottom them out, and then we'll torque them to 22 foot-pounds. Start in the center and work your way out. Torque them in the same sequence. Now from back underneath the vehicle, let's go ahead and put in our lower bolts. We'll just start these in, bottom them out, and then torque these to 22 foot-pounds as well. Back up top, we're going to reconnect in our throttle body here. Let's go ahead and listen for a click. Give it a nice tug, make sure it's secure, and then we're going to put in our mounting bolt for that. Just go ahead and bottom this out, and then you'll torque this to 22 foot-pounds as well. Now it's going to be time to get the fuel rail back up on here. Pay special attention to these black tips right along here. You want to make sure that they're clean and free of any debris that might be around them. This is essentially how it's going to seal and prevent gasoline from pouring down the backside of your engine. Now we can bring this down, and we're just going to try to line up each of the fuel injectors with their corresponding holes going down the line. Sometimes if you just feel along the backside, it can help you try to get them lined up. Okay, that feels pretty good. Now we're just going to take our black spacers here, and you want to just put it between the engine and the fuel rail itself. Slide that right in there. We'll do the same on this one. Just try to get them to stay in for a second. Okay. There we are. Assuming you have all of your fuel injectors lined up properly, this should sit flush. As you can tell, this looks great. Let's continue on with those 2 studs. Let's go ahead and start these in. Once they're both started, we'll bottom them out, and then we're going to torque them to 15 foot-pounds. Get this connected in. Okay. Make sure that this hose right here is secured. It's very important. It's a vacuum hose. Let's grab this hose. We're going to go ahead and slide it right over this as well. Make sure it's secure. Now let's secure our wiring for this. Just go ahead and slide it right onto the stud. Make sure that's secure. Let's go ahead and get this out of the throttle body. Take a quick inspection, make sure there's no debris inside this area. Install your air filter. Now let's go ahead and grab onto that cover. We're gonna start lining everything up. Now the back side of this cover right here has some little tabs. You need to make sure those tabs line up with their corresponding holes back here. You just kind of roll it in. Just get it lined up. Slide them in. Push this down. Go ahead and lock it in. Make sure that's in. Let's move our way along here. Now we have the area for this hose right there. Just go ahead and squeeze that clamp right there, and then we'll slide it right on. Let's get this big tube on here. Just try to slide it over that. There we are. Make sure you tighten this clamp. You definitely don't want any dirty or unmetered air sneaking into the engine. It's going to cause a running issue. Make sure that's nice and snug. Now we have this hose. That's going to go right onto here. Just go ahead and slide it right down on there. Squeeze that clamp, bring it down. Give it a nice tug. And of course, put it up in here and make sure it's secure. Let's go ahead and get this hose on there. Just going to go ahead and squeeze on this clamp, try to keep it in its place and slide it over. There we are. Make sure the clamp's doing its job. We can get our plastic shield up on here. Just want to line it up. Get this on there. This one has the stud still attached. Start that. And then just snug them both up. That's that one. Do the same to the other. Reconnect your negative battery terminal. Go ahead and snug this up. Okay, so now you're just going to go ahead and hop inside the passenger compartment and start the car. You might find that you have a long crank, but keep cranking it and make sure the car starts. After that, just pay attention to the dash and make sure you don't have a check engine light. Here we go. Little bit of a long crank. It's running good. And I don't have a check engine light. Perfect.